Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everybody. My name is Irwin, and I am an alcoholic. I'm that alcoholic that the book talks about. I thought about sharing this story with you all, and I'm going to share what it was like, and then a period of what happened and what it's like now. It took 39 years and a month before I was able to get into Alcoholics Anonymous for the last time and stay here. And it's been a little over 37 years and almost a month that I've been here. I was born in 1946. And I tease all them people down there in Casper, where I first started going to meetings, that they built that clubhouse down there, the very first clubhouse that they had in Casper in 1946. They built it because they knew I was coming. And they get a laugh out of it. My sobriety date is November 30th, 1985. And I'm very humbled to have that sobriety day. It's not the very first one where I quit drinking, but it was the one where it stuck. As a kid, I was, kind of a outcast, I felt. My name, everybody used to try to tease me about my name, and then they'd hear what my mother called me when she was trying to get me in a house, and they teased me about that. I was born with a name of Irwin Henry, and you could hear my mother for a block hollering that out for me to come home. And so everybody picked up on it, and they teased me about it, and it taught me to fight, taught me to stand up. You don't need to tease me about that. That's my given name. Just like yours is a given name, And like I say, I started out very young as a rebel. I got to sometimes believe that I was born a rebel. Because anything that my dad or mother ever wanted me to try to do or suggest that I do, I wouldn't do it. I sit and dwell on a picture that used to hang in the hallway when we was going down the stairs. That's where my bedroom was at, and it was this boy in a French or a pea coat and one of them beret type caps, and he just looked so lonely and lost. And by God, I could sit there and feel the same way. That's just how bad it was around my family, and they tried to do the best for me. I got to give them credit there. My mother was a born and raised Catholic, and she wanted to keep that religion. They didn't go to church very much, but it was up to them to get us children baptized, even though we didn't give any permission. We did it and had a godfather and a godmother, I guess 6th or 7th grade, these people were saying that they were godly like, but my godfather was struck drunk probably 2 hours after he got out of church on Sunday. And I didn't know that for a long time, but the godmother, she tried to lead us down the right path, and she'd take us over and feed us breakfast on Sunday mornings. And I got to a point where I didn't like doing that anymore. So I found different ways to get away from it. 7th grade, they booted me out of Catholic grade school because Monsignor couldn't do anything with me anymore. I was too rebellious and loved to fight. And there was one particular guy that me and another guy beat up on maybe once or twice a week. And he just wouldn't stop. wouldn't stop. So I get into the junior high. Well, it was only about a block and a half from where I lived. And I'd leave and go home for lunch. Well, my dad was a whiskey drinker. He liked that Walker's Deluxe. Back up a little bit. I started drinking beer probably when I was 7. That the reward for going to the ice box and getting him a beer was we got to have a sip of it. My little sisters never stood a chance. I'd bully him out of the way and take the beer back to him. Well, he finally figured out that's what I was doing, so he'd give them a little sip, regardless of whether I brought it back to him. And I liked what that stuff done to me from the first time on. There was a instant feeling of, wow, I like this stuff. And I pursued it. Every time I got a little chance to have a little beer, I drank a little bit more. And so this deal when I was in the 7th grade, walking home for lunch, he had this whiskey in the ice box, and not the ice box, but the freezer, ice cold. And it was starting to thicken up. It was that cold. And I'd have a little sip of that. Not quite a shot, but I had a pretty good bunch of it. And then I'd take it over to the sink and put a little water into it, put it back in the freezer again. Well, about 3 times doing that, it starts forming ice crystals in the whiskey. I didn't know it was doing that, but he come home one night and had a little shot out of it. He says, somebody's been in my whiskey. It's got ice crystals in it. And I didn't put them in there. And I had to confess, well, I've been having a little sip of it. He said, well, you stay out of it. You're too young to be drinking that. So I resorted to their liquor cabinet above everything else in the house. It was top shelf. We hear about that top shelf material in the liquor stores. I definitely had some top shelf stuff that my mom and dad kept up in the cupboard that they'd have one drink out of it on New Year's Eve, and that's where it went for the rest of the year. One drink. So these bottles was fairly full and pretty well sealed. And, so I was starting to polish them off and doing the same thing that I was doing with the whiskey, putting a little water into it to keep the level just about the same. They never did figure that out. When they moved out of that house, I'd been out of it for a while, but that stuff just stayed up there in that top cupboard. They never did figure out that I had been watering that stuff down. And they never did figure it out when they poured it down the sink. My mother got mad and poured it all down the sink before they moved to Arkansas. I went to the Navy at 17. I got in trouble with the law at 17 years old and resisting arrest and minor in possession and eluding policemen and just all sorts of things that you could get in trouble about. And I stood in front of this judge that had a bunch of kids that was in trouble all the time too. But her and this deputy sheriff decided they was going to make an example out of us. And we stood before her and she said, you shouldn't have been drinking. You're too young to be drinking. And I said, I know that, ma'am. And she says, the deputy sheriff Art Terry and myself been talking about this and this stuff's getting too bad around Casper, and we're going to give you the choice of 6 months in county jail. I'd heard some horror stories about county jail, or you can go to the service of your choice. Well, I said, I'll look into going to either the Marine Corps or the Navy. And we went down about 3 days later and flipped a coin to whether we was going to go in the Marines or the Navy. And the Navy won out. So I get in the Navy, and you know, the alcohol, hell, I wasn't old enough to buy it, but everybody, you know, you're old enough to serve for your country, we'll buy you beer. And I wasn't, you know, I was drinking beer most of the time, but I drank a lot of Joe rum and everything else. Alcoholism is a progressive illness, you know, and I didn't know this at the time. I knew it was getting me drunk, and I liked the feeling that I was getting from it. And it made me feel like I fit in. You know, what more could a person ask? You know, I got married after I got out of the service shortly, and another one of them deals where I run off and we was going to try to go to Canada and get married. I didn't have enough money to get into Canada for the time that it was going to take to get us checked out. So we had to turn around and come back here to Billings, and got married by the JP down here a couple of days later. And that lasted for about 14 years. And she put up with a lot of my stuff. You know, I worked in the oil field service industry, driving truck, and worked my way up into a service position with this one company, and district manager for another company that I'd worked for a number of years, 7, 8 years each, you know. And but the alcohol was starting to take its toll. 1978, I got my first DUI, and there wasn't any way that I could really get out of it, because the pickup that I wrecked was wadded up bad enough that you could have put it probably in the back of another full-size pickup. And I walked away from it with some cuts and contusions and a broken collarbone and a DUI. And I get in front of this judge, and everybody teasing me. Well, that isn't her real name. Well, it sure was. It was her last name was Judge Fear. You know, and I was kind of spooked standing in front of her. I'll admit that. And then, you know, she says, you were a little bit drunk out there the other night. I said, oh, I only had a couple of beers. And they had a blood alcohol count on me of 0.28. I only had a couple of beers. She wouldn't buy that, you know. So I wound up getting a suspended license for 6 months, told to go to AA and a little bit of drug or alcohol counseling, and about a $350 fine at the time. Well, I walked through into the first meeting of AA on October 17th, 1978, about 9 days before I turned 32 years old. You know, and like I tell people around the rooms, you know, when I walked in there for the very first time, I looked around the rooms, and I seen a whole bunch of old geezers sitting there. Now I are one. And, you know, I really wasn't wanting to be there. I was just doing this to satisfy that judge. And I made those 12 meetings. And for some unknown reason, I managed to stick around going, you know, I didn't go to real regular meetings, but I managed to stay dry for a year and 2 months. I call it a period of sobriety. Had nothing to do with sobriety. Miserable, still very miserable with life. You know, and Friendly Power Persuasion went to a Christmas party, and my wife at the time said, well, you've been off of it long enough. You ought to be able to control it, handle it. God, that's all I wanted to hear. Lo and behold, I drank 2 double shots of cream de mint on the rocks that night. Walked out of that room You done good, Irwin. You got control. I smile about it today. It was less than a week later. I was struck drunk again. Same old stuff that I was doing. Pursued it again for another year or so, and got back into AA. The wife told me that I needed to get back into AA, or else she was going to load everything up and head up north. So I came back to AA again, and lo and behold, same group of people. They're very nice people. I can't ask for nicer people to be in my life. Same group of people was still there, all smiles, having a good time. And I still felt awful lonesome, uh, didn't fit. And, this guy that I had worked with had been there, and he'd been there for 5 years. And seeing the change in the guy, he had something that I wanted. So it was about 6 months after I got back in here again, that I asked him if he'd show me what he'd done to get sober, because I knew his drinking habit. I drank with him, and he was the kind of guy that started his day at 4 a.m. with a little snort. I never did get down to that low, but RB did, and I asked him to sponsor me, and we were supposed to meet at for lunch on Friday and talk about what we were going to do. I never got to have that meeting with him. That Friday morning, he suffered a massive stroke. Was paralyzed on the left side, could hardly walk, and he couldn't talk. And I never got to have that first meeting with him. I continued to go and see him in the nursing home. He was that bad that they put him in a nursing home. And I got angry one day and gave it up. Went back, drank again. This God that I was trying to understand, why would he let something like that happen to RB after 5 years of change of his life? And I was angry about it. Well, I drank again for a little while, and then the ultimatum was put on, that she was going north, load up everything we had, and going home to mama and daddy. So I came back in again, and we tried to make a go of it for a while, and got to a point where I moved out, got an apartment, never did get the divorce. But, I was staying out of town quite a bit as I driving truck, and she wanted me to come home and help her with the kids. She was having some problems with them. It was getting pretty boy. My son was getting pretty antsy with her. So I said, well, if you'll come in here and clean this apartment up where I get all my deposit back, I'll move back in with you. Well, she did what I asked her to do, and I got the money back and moved back in. And on a Monday, there was a set of divorce papers sitting on the table Friday morning. What's the first thing a good alcoholic does? You get that kind of stuff laid on you. Back at it for another year and a half. And then I don't know, this old man that I went to meetings with the first time down there in Casper. Frank Thomas was his name, and he used to always say every time that we do a first step meeting, he says, If you can't remember your last drunk, Irwin, chances are you probably haven't had it yet. So when I walked back through the doors on November 30th, 1985, I wasn't a full 24 hours sober yet, but I knew that was the place that I needed to be. You know, the last drunk I came to, and all the people that I had went out there with got tired of my BS. And then finally I passed out or blacked out. I don't remember a lot of the night that happened that night, but they all got up and left me. I went out to see if find my pickup. It wasn't out there in the parking lot. And I rode out there with some of them people. And so I was kind of stranded. Lo and behold, there was one person in that place that I recognized. It was a guy that I've been trying to get to fight for I don't know how many months because he was trying to put the hustle on my ex-wife, this jealousy rage. And he said, that's all right, I'll leave her alone. I went, well, he was doing it sneakily, but I went over and asked that man to give me a ride home. Humiliation and humility I experienced that night. You know, having to go do that and then humbly asking the man if he'd take me home. And he did. And she started giving me the ration. And I said, well, I'm going back to AA tomorrow. 2:00 Saturday afternoon, I was back in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, this crippled up old cowboy that I talked about, Paul Nash, he's dead quite a few years now. But that man was there to welcome me through the doors all 3 times that I came back. You know, I'll be forever grateful to him. You know, he said the last time I come back through the door, he said, glad to see you was able to make it back, Irwin. We've been hearing some pretty wild stories about you. You know, and it was getting worse. I'll guarantee you that. I'm very grateful today that I wasn't shot or knifed or some of that other stuff that happens out there. You know, it could have happened to me. By the love and grace of God, you know, I was able to get back into the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wanted to be here this time. No ifs, ands, or buts. You know, I hung around again for about another 6 weeks, and there was this old boy that had came in about 6 weeks earlier than the first time that I came to Alcoholics Anonymous back in '78, Roy W. And he was still there. Now, he'd been through a divorce, lost his kids, lost a leg to sugar diabetes. They had to take it off just right below the knee. So, he had a stub and a prosthetic. And 7 years time that he'd been around here, the difference in that man was like night and day. And he had something that I wanted. And I finally worked up enough courage. I said, Roy, I says, would you mind showing me how you've done this? He said, yeah. He says, I hear you sit around the rooms and admit that you're an alcoholic. You say you're an alcoholic. You really believe that? I says, absolutely. I said, it's getting worse. No, I'm full bore alcoholic, full blown. He says, can you accept that fact? I said, again, Roy, absolutely, I have to, because it's not getting any better. He says, can you surrender to that fact? I said, again, Roy, absolutely. I know it's not going to get any better. And the only thing out there for me is locked up, covered up, or get sober. and I want to get sober this time. Last question he asked, he said, "You willing to go to any length to do this thing?" I said, "Absolutely. I want to try my hardest." And so we started working out of the book. And, I got through the third step before I moved up north because I couldn't find work around Casper there on account of my driving record. Nobody wanted to hire anybody that had a DUI. So I went up there and went to work for my brother-in-law's on a farm. And was up there a little over 2 years. But I did the third step with Roy. And believe it or not, that man took that prosthetic off and we got down on our knees and said the third step there. I can't tell you the feeling that overwhelmed me. This man, the physical handicap that he had, willing to get down on his knees to say that prayer with me. No words can describe it. I knew this was going to happen tonight. The last 6 months, Irwin's really got in touch with emotions. When I get to talking about these people that mean so much to me today, I get emotional. We sit here and we talk the language of the heart. That's where the emotions come from. I'm a firm believer of that. It's this walk of sobriety this time has been beyond my wildest imagination. Going back to that woman and staying sober through the whole ordeal until she wasn't going to change. She was going to be the same old woman, same old Shirley. She wanted control, total control. And I couldn't let her have it. I'm staying sober, trying to change what I've done in the past, and you won't accept it. And she picked a fight with me one night, and I smacked her one time, and I went all those years without ever harming her again. And this night here, I'm stark raving, sober, insane. And she slapped me, and I grabbed her hands, and we tussled to the ground. Thank God it didn't happen, but I had that woman on the ground with both arms pinned to the ground with my knees. And there was a momentary thought that came to this head. Well, you could end it all for her. Grab her by the ears and smack her into the concrete. I threw my hands up in the air and I got up off of her and I said, I ain't got time to do this anymore. I went into my then sponsor. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, Irwin, he says, I guarantee you better do something different. Or you're either going to drink again or they're going to lock you up for the rest of your life. If that would have happened, that's what would have been. I'd have been, life in prison. So that's when I moved to Montana. February of 1988. Coming up on 35 years up here. And it's the best move I ever made in my life. We lived around Billings for about the first 20 or 13 years, I guess. We've been out here 22. But, you know, what one of the suggestions that Rod made to me before I come up here, he says, now, if you'll put yourself into the service in Alcoholics Anonymous and you know, just be there for people, he says, you'll quit worrying about this stuff that's going on down here. You have a right to have a decent life, Irwin, and you haven't been getting a fair shake for what you've been doing. You know, I supported the family again full time and was trying to take care of them the best the way that I knew how to, and it still wasn't getting me anywhere with that woman. So I came to Montana, and lo and behold, I started working with people. You know, the first few that I tried to work with, they got struck drunk again, and I'd go talk with older people that was around the meetings, and they say, you did everything that you could, Irwin. You were successful. You didn't drink, did you? I said, absolutely not. The only bad one that I had was a young man that I was trying to steer clear of this young little gal that she was pretty frisky. And Sharon had warned me, you know, she was looking for a sugar daddy. You leave her alone. You know, I was in my 40s and she was probably 17. Well, she wound up latching on to this young man that I'd been working with that was 35 years old, a bodybuilder. And he, you know, he's working hard to stay sober. And I told him, I suggested to him, I said, you better leave that alone. I said, I'll guarantee you that little gal will pull you through a knothole. Damn sure she did. They was talking on the phone one night and she said something to him. And I don't know what caused it, but the man had a piece of electrical wire wrapped around his throat and jumped out of his garage door and hung himself. What else could I have done? You know, that's the kind of tough stuff that we go through in sobriety. You know, and you know, I've lost a lot of friends to that big C word. You know, people that the one guy was almost the big brother that I never did have. I can't tell you how much AA we did. You know, he was in service as well as I was. And we went to a lot of functions and was just involved in our sobriety, not just participating. We were involved, you know, and it's been the best thing for me in my life, staying involved. You know, we had a little group out here in Fromberg, the Kingsport group, that was in existence for about, I think 47 years. One of the first ones that was part of this group is a guy that lived over at Joliet, and he just celebrated 45 years last November himself. And the rest of them, some of them had died, some of them have moved away, you know, and it just got to where it was Sharon and myself for, you know, the last 5 weeks that we tried to, well, we was over there at an open meeting and nobody was showing up. We tried to host it on Zoom, and the district secretary forgot to renew the Zoom account that they were allowing us to use. And so that one fell apart too. So we finally just shut the Kingsport group down. And we've been going to this Joliet group across country here for, probably 10, 15 years. And, you know, it's had three or four different meeting places, but we've always stuck together with them. You know, so AA is a part of our lives today, a very integral part of our lives. You know, and I don't necessarily try to help alcoholics today. I'll help anybody that needs a hand. That's the way I want to be. You know, and I believe that's the way the God of my understanding wants me to be. You know, that saying of being of maximum service to my fellow man today is the best thing that I could do for Irwin. You know, I quote a lot of that out of the book in meetings and share with people some of the things that really mean a lot to me. You know, and what I suggest for newcomers to do, or the ones that are just wanting to stick around here, to go to page 86, 87, 88 in the morning and read those dictates off of those 3 pages. Get in tune with this God of your understanding first thing in the morning. And then there's another little prayer. I believe that I sent it off to Stephen, called The Secret, that I say pretty often out of the book. And it's the secret. I meet my God in the morning. Oh gosh, where'd I put it? Under my book? There you are. I better have some readers. I meet my God in the morning when my day is at its best. His presence comes like sunrise, like a glory in my breast. And all day long that presence lingers, and all day long he stays with me, and we sail in perfect calmness over very troubled seas. So I think I know the secret, learned from many a troubled way. You seek him in the morning if you want him throughout your day. You know, and that was copied off of a guy that spoke up in Butte, Montana, quite a few years back. His nickname was Umdiliago, and I guess the way I heard it, the man was an ex-mafia. He was a pretty rough guy, I understand. I never got to hear him personally, but I listened to his cassettes when they were doing it on cassettes. I got a whole basement full of them. That's how far I can go back in AA. And there's some of the speakers that we still listen to today occasionally. You know, so like I say, Alcoholics Anonymous is a very integral part of my life. And without Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't know whether it'd be in Irwin today. You know, I'm very grateful that this fellowship has accepted me just the way I am. And I accept all of you just the way you are. You know, we're brothers and sisters in a fellowship of love. That's what this fellowship's all about. Unconditional loving people, loving unconditional loving people. I'm very grateful to be here tonight with each and every one of you, and I'm very grateful that each and every one of you took the time out to suit up, show up, and be part of this thing. One more thing, I love and care about each and every one of you, and there ain't a damn thing that you can do about it. Thank you very much.